Thank you for taking the time to sit with us today, because it's about telling the story of our Chibok girls. It's about telling the story of the status of women in Nigeria. It's about advocating for human rights, equal rights, education rights, and all the rights for everyone, including our girls and our women.
The Security Council of the United Nations condemned the abduction of the girls in Nigeria after the Human Rights Council of the United Nations also condemned the act.
The fertility rate in Nigeria is 5.6, meaning, as most of you know, that the average woman is expected to have no less than 5 children, but some of that has changed in recent years. And then, of course, the lifetime risk of maternal death in 2014 is still higher than we would like, because Nigeria is one of the highest, at 1 in 23 pegged at the current stats that we have here. I put in the Millennium Development Goals, specifically goal number 3 and 6, because they overwhelmingly affect what I'm talking about this evening. Goal number 3 is dealing with gender equality. Nigeria doesn't do well on gender equality. In fact, the Global Gender Index says that Nigeria is 106 out of 136 countries measured. That's a very, very poor performance, if you ask me. So I'll come back to that again, but goal number 6 is dealing with health issues, primarily communicable diseases, but doesn't emphasize too much on non-communicable diseases. But the good news is that one of the things that the MDGs are designed to do is, by the end of 2015, a re-evaluation of what all needs to be done differently, and perhaps some of the measures that need to be improved upon. Look at the progress. We don't seem to have made much in terms of how we have done in securing all of those 8 goals. And remember, I'm focusing only on 2 of those goals. So overall, in our 14-year journey, we've just paid lip service to some of those things. And that's the reason that in 2014, a woman who goes in to give birth will not come out alive. That's the reason that in 2014, a notorious group such as Boko Haram will walk off with 200 and something girls and nobody cares. The African practice of disinheriting daughters, I think it's something that we need to go back and re-examine. There are places where they won't even allow you to educate the girls, right? And by the way, keep in mind that there are places in the country where strides are being made, for instance, to protect the rights of widows. There are organizations that are springing up now. But there are women who have gone through the torture already. I'm sure the Nigerians in here found it really ridiculous that our lawmakers were trying to figure out whether a girl should marry at the age of 13. If you're my friend, and I'm a male person, and I like you, one of the ways that I could actually show my love would be to dash you my young daughter, whether or not she wants to go with you, right? So there are many, many questions of violations of human rights that we could get into. And if our government is a representation of every Nigerian, then obviously the way that these girls have been treated is not fair, if anybody can see. Now, the Chibok girls, by the way, are not the first group of girls that were abducted. There's already a community of girls that came back to their communities after they've been manhandled by Boko Haram types. And the problem when these girls come back to their community is the problem of absorption. They are actually alienated. Nobody cares, because it's almost like a taboo to now have to care for this girl who nobody will marry because they're HIV positive. So their pain really continues after they come back. And that's something that we should consider as really not something that we should allow to happen. the pathway to a woman's liberation is still going to be education. The educated woman is going to be that woman who is able to be effective for herself and advocate for herself as an individual, be useful to her family, to her community, and be able to fight for herself because she has a mind and she has the ability to protect herself from any choices that are not good for her.
The Nigeria I knew in 1961 to 63 was exciting and vibrant and alive and open. It was the golden years, and they loved the American Peace Corps. They just thought, we could do anything. And I wrote about 100 letters home, and it's the basis of my book that I've just recently written. It only took me 50 years to write.
The Boko Haram philosophy and that of the Taliban are pretty much the same. Western education, anything that has to do with Westernization is evil. And part of the campaign they've launched, apart from killing everybody, is to use the girls as pawns.
Yes.
They believe education, especially for girls, corrupts the Islamic way of thinking, Islamic life, the Muslim life. And the way to defeat that, or to turn things back, is to find a way to stop the girls from getting an education. And so they go to schools, destroy churches. Churches have Catholic schools, churches have Christian schools. They've destroyed all those places in an attempt to prevent girls from being educated. And this is where we are today.
We are a very rich country, but the perception is that Nigeria is a poor country because wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few people who have held the entire country hostage. We can do it, but we do not yet have the political will to make things happen in Nigeria. Eventually, we will.
I have invented a language called the Igbosa, which is a unification of all the Nigerian languages, culture, ethnicity, name it.
Our problem is deeply entrenched in the mindset of our men. And that has been the case over centuries and centuries. And unless there's a paradigm shift, the problem will continue to repeat itself. I keep wondering, does the United Nations have any programs that would help our men to shift from all the, maybe not from all, but from some of these culturally entrenched views on women?
And there are programs for educating men, but in terms of implementing the programs, for instance, if they go to Nigeria, the men have to be willing to come and get the education. The UN has programs galore, and the one that I saw in South America works perfectly because you actually see pictures of guys who are feeding their children while their women go off to work and school. Now, on the other hand, when the Grameen Bank started to extend microcredits to Nigerian women, their husbands took it from them and married second wives.
I'm so happy you introduced the Millennium Development Goals. One of the Millennium Development Goals adopted by all 189 countries and now 193 in the UN was universal primary education. It's like the question of how do you conceive a child? I believe universal means women and men. And the result of that Millennium Development Goal is that in every region of the world, including Africa, the numbers have increased for women and men. And that target to achieve equality in education, in primary education, is going to be met globally by 2015. It doesn't mean that in every country that it's going to be met, and some of the laggards are, of course, in some of the sub-Saharan African countries. Another one of the targets, maternal mortality, which you referred to, that is also, in fact, it's not going to be met. The target is not going to be met to reduce maternal mortality by 2/3 in every country in 15 years. That's a pretty steep challenge. However, in 15 years, maternal mortality in the aggregate, including in Africa overall, has been reduced by 50%. So that's called a very, very successful failure. That was indicative of the kind of work that is being done at the ground level to try to raise awareness and to implement programs on the ground around the world to protect children and protect girls.
Some of the people who are spokespersons for the Taliban or Boko Haram, they do not represent the Muslim religion. They are fanatics and they are extremists. And for as long as we understand that difference between them and the true practitioners of the religion, then we don't have any reason to generalize to the population of Muslims in any way, shape, or form. So now, for all intents and purposes, Sharia law exists side by side with civil law in 12 out of 36 states in Nigeria. And I think the connection simply exists in the sense that while Sharia law may not in and of itself have been the only trigger for Boko Haram to exist, they definitely used it as cover. Because as you can see, even when Shekau comes on television, and for those of you who don't know Shekau, he's the commander-in-chief of Boko Haram. He talks about representing what God wants and wanting to be able to sell the girls into slavery is what God wants. I don't know if that is something that really represents the views of every Muslim who is watching him as he makes those pronouncements. So when you see environments where the application of Sharia law is unfavorable to women, then groups like this terrorist organization will definitely likely emerge because they have the opportunity to bloom, because there's very little that anybody can say, because they're using the cover of the law to protect themselves.
To date, the prominent Muslim leaders in Nigeria have not taken a stance. The Muslims, the Christians cannot impose their religion on other people. The Muslims have no right to impose their religion on other people. That's basically what we are talking about here. We want a country where everybody can worship what they wanted to worship. They want to be Muslim, they can be free to be Muslims. If they want to be Christian, they can be free. There are even a segment of the Nigerian population that still worship the traditional African religions. And they also can do whatever you need to do. But we are saying here, we need to be very clear, very, very clear, is that no, we're not going to be bound by Sharia law in Nigeria. I think that is first and foremost. Secondly, people need to be held accountable. The government of Nigeria needs to be held accountable. The Muslim leaders need to be held accountable. And the government of Nigeria that are perpetuating and implementing all these laws that women are being discriminated against, they are also on trial.
The Muslims have never said they wanted Sharia for Nigeria. Boko Haram is saying that nonsense. But the Quran clearly says, it says, there shall, there will be, it says here 50, let there be no compulsion in religion. That's what the book says. So I'm saying they've condemned a lot of the leaders just 2 months ago. One of the big sheikhs in Nigeria was killed. He went to give a lecture.
My main issue is, when are the Muslims and the Christians going to come together as a unit to stand up so that the people of your country see that you're united? I think once we begin to have that dialogue, because just looking at the energy that's happening here at this table, how then can you move forward if your leadership and the religious aren't together? Is there a discussion for a symposium so you can talk about those issues and so that you can decree some galvanization of community amongst the people?
So unless and until the leaders of the various religions sit down and say enough.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to terrorize someone with what it says in your book of faith, just like Christians do as well, then there's not going to be any meeting of the minds. Right now, what exists is a suspicion of the other. And unless we get to where there's trust, we're not going to have peace. Well, for the parents of Chibok whose children are missing, today is the 44th day of their absence from home. They've been gone for 44 days, 44 long days. And later on I do ask the question, will they be returned to their parents intact?
All we are saying is bring back our girls.